Okay, peace and love. Imara Ifawuyi here, coming to you live from the beautiful city of Sao Paulo with Find Your Free. Thank you for coming by. Today, I came on, I wanted to discuss for a little while the first installation, the first episode of Diddy the Reckoning on Netflix. So that is basically the new four-part series on Netflix that was created by 50 Cent and his film company, basically. And it is interesting. I have to say, I did finish all four parts yesterday. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that first part. It was quite telling. I can't lie and say that any of it was information I hadn't heard before. But for those who didn't dive into the whole Diddy thing that deeply or whatever, when he was on trial, some of that would be, pretty new information. I mean, for sure, in the four parts, there were things I learned that I had not heard about or hadn't heard about in the detail that they provided. So it was amazing. I want to talk a little bit about it. I mean, this morning I woke up to hear that Sean Combs is already talking about trying to sue Netflix. And the reason for the suing or the lawsuit potential is not because this movie is defamation or anything like that, but it is because throughout the movie, some of the most poignant footage that they had, and there was a lot of really poignant footage, but some of the most powerful stuff that was on there were just clips of Sean Combs up to from 6 days up to the point that he got arrested. And he had a film guy with him. So remember, y'all, remember he went up to New York City ahead of time. He went up there about a week ahead of time so that he could be on camera doing all kind of stuff, looking like he's about the people, going to Harlem, like he's a Harlem shaker. And is going out there to vibe with the folks. And he just was doing his PR campaign, and he wanted to look like he was bringing himself forward to be arrested, for the indictment, and that he was not running from anything, right? So it was all about how we perceived him. But he was up there, and he was staying in a hotel a week earlier, maybe even more than that. And with him was a cameraman, and this cameraman was basically filming him talking to his lawyer, filming him, talking about details around, the kind of focus on swaying through social media the public so that that could impact who ends up being on his jury and how the jury kind of sees him. Like he was already, before he even got arrested, thinking about all these details. And so it was really interesting to see it, because some of the stuff he was saying was like, wow, this guy like is such a marketing guy. Like the whole thing for him from the beginning was, how do I market this? How do I sway it? How do I, shift the narrative to be a narrative that's more favorable to me, that will allow me to have a jury that's more favorable to me, right? And so from the very beginning, he was saying this, and he was going off on his lawyers and being very, very belligerent about them needing to get on their shit because we're losing here. You guys aren't doing your jobs right. You need to figure out how we can sway the people to my side, okay? And so this guy is diabolical. I mean, he's Machiavellian. He's planning step by step ahead of time. He's seeing everything ahead of time. It was very interesting to see that aspect. And so throughout the movie, they had these clips of this footage. How? Because when he did get arrested, that individual, for whatever reason, maybe he didn't get paid or something, he went ahead and sold that footage to, I guess, Netflix via 50 Cent. And so that is some of the most poignant stuff in the movie, because it's giving you Sean Combs, raw, speaking raw, seemingly quite raw, actually saying things that were a bit incriminating. They even had him on camera calling Kalina, who was part of Dirty Money. And remember, her partner in Dirty Money, which, Dirty Money was Sean Combs, Kalina, and her partner, which is the sister that Don Richard, who actually jumped on and ended up being a witness for the trial against Sean Combs and has her own individual lawsuit. Um, he called Kalina in this, video, in these videos. And he was like, trying to get her on board to make statements to try to counter the announcement of Don Richard's lawsuit. So, I mean, he was doing all kinds of witness tampering out the gate. There was a lot of illegality and inappropriate behavior happening with him out the gate, and they had it on film. So it was right there. It was like, dang, I mean, 50 about to get him hemmed up on some extra charges. But baby, when I tell you, when they got into the first episode, it was like, it was slow. They slowly kind of painted the picture of who this kid was, who Sean Combs was, how he became to be, what were the intersecting situations that kind of came together to create this guy who became the monster that he became. And so, at the beginning of this first episode, you've got Sean Combs. He's talking to Mark Agnifolio or Agnifilo or whatever his name is. The guy who was the head of his legal team. And, he's basically just feeling sorry for himself. Oh, he's under so much attack. Why people are just against him. And we've got to change the people's minds. How are we going to get them to see things my way? I mean, just your typical narcissist who doesn't take responsibility or accountability for a single thing that they have done. Doesn't think, man, maybe I could have done that different. Maybe that wasn't the best move. And if he does feel or think it, he would never say it out loud, right? And so then you also, again, you had him talking to Kalina Harper on the phone, trying to get her to make a statement on his behalf. And Kalina's just like, I'm going through my own thing. You want me to make a statement for you, and I'm going through my own thing. Now, mind you, Kalina went ahead and made that statement on his behalf before he went on trial. And then she came in and was on this film talking stuff about him, basically, and has swung back to the other side. So she's all over the place, but whatever. At the end of the day, he was just, grabbing for straws, trying to get people to make him look good. He was looking for places online where Don Richard was speaking highly of him so he could make it look like her lawsuit was nonsense, because before she was saying that she, was, looked up to me and loved me as an employer and boo, boo, boo. He was just scheming, honey, scheming all the way. And I mean, you had I'll Be Sure on this first episode. Just his little quips. For me, I'll Be Sure was important because he was a part of Uptown, a major part of Uptown. He was Uptown's, first big artist, first number one artist. He was the first platinum artist that Uptown had. And for those of you who don't know, Uptown is Andre Harrell's, love his baby, basically, record label that Sean Combs had come in to work as initially as a gopher for. He really was just an everything guy. He was doing everything. And he really proved himself to just be very, very good at getting any and everything done. And then as he grew in his connection with Andre Harrell, he became like a mentee under Andre Harrell. And whatever else, we don't know, because I mean, all these guys are very questionable in terms of which way they swing and all of that. So there are other questions there too. But that is what we know, is that he was on Uptown. I'll Be Sure was a major artist on Uptown. And so that is why I'll Be Sure is coming up in this first episode, because he is a part of the origin story of Sean Combs. But honey, as they went on, I mean, they had Capricorn Clark up in this first episode. They had, and which y'all know, Capricorn Clark was one of the ones that had one of the most poignant testimonies during the trial. She was a former assistant of Sean Combs that became basically the VP of, I believe she was either vice president of operations or something. But she was major in the company, basically running things. For Bad Boy Records at a point, and she went through all kinds of terror and trauma under his, leadership. And so she was on here. Mark Curry, one of his artists that was signed on his label, was on there. And then the person who was woven throughout the entire 4 episodes, who was the strongest testimony and the saddest story, one of the saddest stories outside of Cassie. And they were all very unfortunate and sad. But Kirk Burroughs, the young, handsome young man, that Sean Combs had started Bad Boy with. And man, he did this young man so terrible, y'all. Like Kirk Burroughs, and how he told his testimony. And he was just so, his energy is so good, and you could just tell like he just had to let all of that go. But oh, the things he did to this man was so sad. And so, yeah, he basically at the end of everything after Kirk had helped him build the company up. He basically cut him out of everything and just sent him off to be homeless, y'all. And that's a whole nother story. That thing was so sad. So yeah, he basically co-founded Bad Boy after he left Andre Harrell's mentorship. They parted, and basically Andre had to let him go because he was getting too big for his britches over at Uptown after having done all these different things, you know. And so he went on to form his own company. And with him, he was able to take Biggie Smalls, who he had just recently signed to Uptown. So basically, Andre Harrell had released Biggie Smalls to him to take to form his own Bad Boy. But he knew he didn't have the financial backing with this new company. So this is when he, went to get in front of the big wigs, and he found Clive Davis. And that was kind of the beginning of Bad Boy. But what this first episode does is lay the groundwork before all of that, which is the child. Who was Sean Combs as a child? Um, what did he grow up dealing with? What was his home life like? Who is this young man? How did he get into the record and the music industry? What was he doing at first? And what were some of the major events and things that had happened that had shaped him to become this very callous and cutthroat business guy who, was just doing everything in a very unscrupulous way, right? And so, yeah, that got really interesting. They talked about the CCNY event that happened back in, I believe it was 1991, that I still remember so clear because I was a serious hip hop head back in the early 90s, late 80s, and stuff, all through the 90s and the late 80s. So I was a big hip hop head. And so when the CCNY event happened, it basically was, I think, a major sacrifice that Sean Combs had kind of drummed up for himself that helped launch him into the industry. But basically, he had set up this raggedy event that had all these celebrities that were going to be there. So of course, the public was going to be there in mass. They didn't spend any money on security. They hadn't prepared for this event. And by the time the doors opened, it was a major, massive stampede that took place. And in a few minutes, 9 people were dead, including a pregnant woman who was a woman that was pregnant by, y'all remember Father MC, by that singer Father MC. There was just a lot going on, y'all. And so that was the first debacle that he had, as he had just kind of left. Because Sean Combs, for those of you who don't know, went to Howard University, right? And so he was doing his like school thing, and then he left after a year to pursue music. And he this was his first major thing, but I think there was something more spiritual behind this happening, this occurrence, than Misa I, right? And so all of a sudden, he was working for Uptown at the time of the CCNY event, and it made him look really bad. And Harrell's funders was really like, get rid of this guy. And Harrell fought for him, kept him present. And then Sean Combs went on to do amazing things like, all the A&R and bringing Jodeci and Mary J. Blige and all these amazing artists to Uptown that he basically coddled and raised them up to be everything that they were, from their look to their sound to elements of their music, everything. So he did a lot of big things, right? He worked with all of the Uptown artists and got them to a high level. So by that time, his energy was starting to kind of threaten Andre Harrell. It was becoming like a threat. And that's why Andre was like, okay, this is getting to be a bit much. So like, you need to do your own thing. But he was good to him, and he let him go, and he let him take his artist, Biggie Smalls, with him. And from then, oh Lord, a lot happened. But yeah, I mean, basically, his young childhood, he had a childhood friend on there, a guy by the name of Tim Patterson, I think. Here, I got his name. Yeah, Tim Patterson, someone he grew up with, who was just telling the story of who this young man was. He basically was like a little goofy little guy, just didn't have the cool factor at all, got bullied a lot, grew up in a strange household. Mom was one of these, hip women that, she'd been in that gangster life in Harlem. And, Sean Combs's dad had been killed because of being in that gangster life. We talking mafioso type stuff, lots of drug dealing. She had always been around a lot of that. So she was the party house. She had the party and the brothel going, and the women, the gorgeous women and the men. And Sean Combs and his friends would be lurking around there, and they'd be having them perform and do different things and dance on a little stage that she had in her living room. Drugs was being done, alcohol. Who knows what was happening to Sean and his little friends? I'm sure they were seeing very inappropriate things and probably being solicited to do very inappropriate things. So basically, he didn't have no real structure around his home life that was wholesome and healthy at all. And on top of it, apparently, Miss Janice, his mother, was very abusive physically. Patterson said, I used to get my behind beat up, but when I would see him get whooped, it was a different energy. So mom was, wicked with it. Because I don't know how you could beat on a child. I don't get it. But so she was really beating Sean down. I mean, really annihilating him. And so that gives us a little bit more perspective on why he has such a disdain for women. Because it's obvious that he has a very, very serious disdain for women, and coupled with a jealousy of women. Okay, so he's dealing with some major trauma stuff, right? Still doesn't excuse all of the horror that he has done over these years. But yeah, it was interesting to hear a bit about, his lifestyle. Mom used to have him looking like a dandy, dressed, honey, in chinchillas, wearing the furs, the hats, dressed down all the time. He didn't really vibes good in school because he was just different. He was sheltered, but in a weird way, because obviously it's not like he was sheltered in a wholesome way. Um, so there was a lot going on there. And it just, it gave a lot more context to, who this person is that we've been dealing with and witnessing and seeing over these years, and, what the makings of him have been. So that was interesting. That first episode also had a young woman by the name, or an older sister now, by the name of Joy Dickerson, which was probably one of Sean Combs' first people that he got on tape, in these um, very inappropriate situations where he had hugged her and had her on tape doing very not she wasn't necessarily doing anything, having things done to her because she was probably so ugged and out of it, and she had to find out about it from a third party. She didn't even know it had happened. And so this was really a traumatic and sad part of this episode because she was one of his OG victims. I'm sure maybe not the first because he seems like he's been a deviant for a very long time. But yeah, um, and so that story was really sad to see her tell her story and how it basically pretty much destroyed her life. Eric Sermon from EPMD came on, for those of you who remember him. Crossroads, EPMD was dope back in the 80s, early 90s. Um, he helped to tell the story of the CCNY incident. That was just crazy. But yeah, y'all, it was a lot. I mean, Fiddy put a lot in this episode. I mean, every episode was packed with stuff. And then eventually they started getting into the Biggie and the Tupac thing. And just Sean Combs' obsession with Biggie. His obsession with Tupac, really. He always had this thing for Tupac. And another thing that was a very big and prevalent message in this, especially first episode, was that Sean Combs, one of his things is he, when he's trying to conquer somebody or look bigger or badder than somebody, the first thing he thinks to do is to try to get their women. And so he did a lot of that kind of stuff, where he would go after people's women, which is how he got Kim Porter from up under I'll Be Sure. So he could have her as his little, slaved out, baby mama for all the years that she dealt with his crap, before, she lost her life in very strange circumstances, right? So um, he's always looking to try to take somebody's woman, okay? And so Eric Sermon from EPMD told the story of how he had been beefing with him because he liked Eric's friend and ex-girlfriend, Misa Hilton, Sean Combs' first baby mom, Justin's mom, who was really big in, the fashion thing. So yeah, So, he eventually was able to get Misa. They had Justin. They stayed together for a couple of years. Supposedly had a uh, very volatile relationship and whatever, very physically violent because he's always been physically violent. They said even from back at Howard, like he has just always been a very violent dude. And so, this gave a lot of texture, gave a lot of context, and it was interesting. I highly suggest y'all, if you haven't started to watch it, maybe just take it one episode at a time. Maybe you don't have to marathon it like I did. But yeah, it is interesting. Look, I don't think it's a hit piece. I didn't see them trying to really bend anyone's thought in any type of way. It's just presenting the information. And yes, a lot of the people are victims of his or people that he had issues with. So, I mean, they're not speaking about him in the most uplifting way, but at the same time, the facts are the facts and the information is the information. I didn't get the sense that anybody featured in this film was doing any lying at all. So, we just have to accept it for what it is. For those who are lacking in any kind of moral kind of capacity, or they just are morally corrupted, they might think that even though he's treated so many people so horribly, that it is what it is. It's just that's what it is when you out here trying to get to the top of the world or whatever. But the way that he has stepped on people, abused people, manipulated, Machiavelli people. I mean, this is a real wicked situation, and he really is, from what I can tell, some kind of a like high level vampire. That's what I took, is that he literally just feeds on people, and that's it. He will steal your soul. He seeks to annihilate you. You could call it a narcissist. You can call it what you want. But it's a high level vampire energy, and that is why he's so powerful. He figured out how to usurp and suck off the energy and siphon off of other people at a level that your average person cannot. And so, yeah, y'all check out the video. I'm gonna go ahead and get off because nobody popped on. It must be a bad time to be live, but I hope you guys are having a wonderful day.